One of my favorite things about Vampire the Masquerade are its bloodlines. When I first got into the game, I found the clans a little bit restrictive, like I only had a narrow bandwidth of archetypes to play with. I hope you can forgive me for that. I didn't know yet at the time that the clans are not really what the game is about most of the time. I was thinking of them in terms of like ancestries and character classes, and that like the variance within them is absolutely enormous. This was many years ago. Vampire, like all World of Darkness, is a game that puts great stock in the verisimilitude generated by the sorts of odd exceptions and their interplay, the endless manifestations of fate that make the real world so interesting. Bloodlines seemed like the main way that manifested back then to me. And though with my greater understanding of the setting, I no longer see them as the only way to play my way, they still have a very fond spot in my heart. So I was not exactly happy when 5th edition basically did away with them. Now, they didn't get rid of them completely. They still obviously exist in the lore of the game, and Clan Hecata comprises several of them integrated into the game with their own lore sheets and alternative discipline loadouts. They just all have the same bane, and I don't like that. It never went far enough for me, right? Bloodlines used to be ubiquitous, weird and mysterious, with their own disciplines and banes and muddled origins, and with the streamlined design of 5th edition, it always struck me as rather difficult to manifest that sort of thing here. They did put in the Salubri, which are not a clan, but a bloodline, and I don't like that they did it. I think it was just a weird optics decision to make it so you could play a tragic good guy vampire as a very open and clear character option. I think this actually stops a lot of new players from actually properly immersing themselves in the tone of the setting by giving them an out from the evil aspects of vampirism to have this overdrawn main character syndrome type character. And that's just not what the game is about. And then they put in just none of the other bloodlines. It just gets my goat, and that, thanks for coming to my Theodore speech. I don't even hate on the Salubri or people who play them as such. I just think having them as the only bloodline and then labeling them as a clan is ridiculous. I get people asking all the time, why are they not in the clans video? It's because they're not a fucking clan. They're not a clan. I think I have found a way to add more bloodlines in a satisfying way though, even taking advantage of some of the cooler new systems in 5th edition, and so I'm gonna present some of them to you here. I actually talked about this particular video that's happening now on my appearance on the St. Pete by Night interview podcasts months ago, which you should go check out. It was a great interview. Much as their actual plays, they have like an actual play podcast set in St. Petersburg, Florida, which is not just limited to vampire, they do werewolf and hunter as well, and you can participate in that world as a player. The interview should have popped up in the, I think up here, sidebar area by now. And just to be clear, these bloodlines I am about to show you, they are my own homebrew stuff. These are not any of the official bloodlines that exist in old World of Darkness books. I originally wanted to develop them for both V5 and V20, but I must admit that I am much more knowledgeable about V5 as a system than V20 and probably would not have done a very good job in the latter. I do hope that by looking at these and having my design decisions explained to you, you will gain some level of understanding that will allow you to create your own bloodlines and or convert some old ones into 5th edition, because there's like many more than I know. But lore-wise, these are not canon. I think they all fit with the canon, but they often do this by including a lot of cross-splat stuff or by necessitating a certain deep understanding of the cosmology of World of Darkness outside of like the world of vampire. Some might make perfect sense to you, but just not fit your particular game, and that's fine. Don't let yourself get talked into any of them if you don't like them or feel confident running a game for them. I don't permit Salubri either, and those are vanilla book material because they do not match the tone of my games. I am in no way affiliated with official WoD content, not even the homebrew scene around it. I don't know what's going on in there. I see myself first and foremost as a reviewer. I'm gonna go through these 6 bloodlines from least weird and most lore integrated to most weird and least lore integrated. I'm also gonna link a Google Doc containing all of this homebrew, but there the order will not be in terms of weirdness, but in terms of the alphabet, which I have memorized. Speaking of memories, you know what I literally just said? You know, the thing about this being entirely homebrew and not canon lore? Yeah, this one is actually something that exists canonically in Vampire. These are the Mnemosyne, a group that exists within Clan Malkavian, and LA by Night actually had a character associated with that group on as a guest character played by Matthew Mercer. Cuthbert Beckett is canonically one of the most trusted agents of Aristotle de Laurent, so much so that Aristotle adopted him, even though Beckett is actually a gangrel and not a Malkavian. They're not exactly on speaking terms right now, but you know, that's how it is. And who Aristotle de Laurent is, you will find out in a moment. Many secret societies exist among the Malkavians, but few are as powerful as the Mnemosyne, an elusive group of lore seekers and memory collectors dedicated to the study of the secret history of kindred and their creator Cain. No one knows quite how ancient they are, though their roots may stretch back at least to classical antiquity. Through the power of their blood and dedication to their mastery of its secrets, they have become a bloodline in their own right, privy to powers only they command, and the knowledge of which they guard more closely than even the Tremere do their sorcery. Over the course of millennia, the Mnemosyne have developed certain powers within the disciplines Auspex, Dominate, and Obfuscate that allow them to manipulate thought and memory to a degree others would consider impossible and certainly terrible. It is only one of many of their practices that make power players who know of their existence eye them with suspicion and hostility, no matter how benign they portray themselves to be. Their quest for truth is paramount, and they do not shy away from prying into forbidden knowledge that the leadership of both Sabbat and Camarilla find extremely inconvenient. In fact, their current leader, Aristotle de Laurent, has made a point on specifically pursuing these avenues of research, and some decades ago compiled the Encyclopedia Vampirica, a comprehensive tome of knowledge about the kindred that the Camarilla has banned, yet which every elder secretly owns. The book was originally intended to be rather exclusive, meant only for de Laurent's close associates among kindred scholars and Camarilla leaders. But the manuscript was intercepted by Aisha, the leader of the Mnemosyne's rival sect, the Yocastians, who decided to print it and put it in wide circulation, available for kindred and kine alike. The world of mortals took it as fiction, but the wrong people having access to such knowledge was not something the Camarilla could abide, so they made her, though notably not Aristotle, into an anathema enemy of the sect, hunted for all her knights. The Yocastians are also a bloodline and secret society of Malkavians dedicated to the study of hidden Cainite lore, and while they are as independent from the major kindred sects as the Mnemosyne, the Yocastians are in practice more closely aligned with the Sabbat, where the Mnemosyne prefers the Camarilla. Theories abound as to what caused the feud between these two factions, or if they were in fact at one point one and the same. All anyone knows is that they are bitter enemies today. Other things they have in common is their enmity with the Ventru elder Bindusara, a scholar of Cainite mysteries in his own right, and the practice of voluntary group diableries by elders in the clan to pass their knowledge to future generations. Compared to regular diableries, the knowledge passed on this way is immense. The Yocastians do not, however, seem to have the same level of sophistication when it comes to mnemonic powers of the blood that the Mnemosyne do. So yeah, the Mnemosyne are a well-established faction in World of Darkness lore, and you can buy the Encyclopedia Vampirica on DriveThruRPG. It's available, you can just get it. That's how wide the circulation has gone. Now, as you may be able to tell, the disciplines the Mnemosyne have are the same as the Malkavians, and they also have the same bane and the same compulsion, so what even makes them a bloodline? The answer to that question is ambiguous. There isn't even really a firm point in time when a group becomes a bloodline, when you drill down to the specifics of it. Species, interestingly, is quite similar to this. We just have a very good convention for it in science. But let's keep to vampire, right? It is mostly a matter of convention. But let's for a moment talk about additions, right? If this were V20, I would have replaced one of the in-clan disciplines with a different one called mnemonics or something like that, and put all the powers I wanted in there. Because the way it used to work is you would get a level in a new discipline and then know all of the powers associated with that level. In V5, we have fewer disciplines, but each of them has way more powers, because you have to choose which of the powers you pick from each level. And some of the narrower disciplines were integrated into the fewer disciplines as powers. V5 is what I designed these bloodlines for, so I obviously tried to stick as closely to their design conventions as possible. So instead of making up whole new disciplines, I do feel like the approach of making specific powers is valid, provided those powers are cool. I've sort of come around to the idea, especially now that more books for 5th edition have come out and the catalogs are not so bare bones. Though I find it still has some downsides, like sort of washing away the identities of many clans by putting no restrictions in place, aside from the self-restraint experienced players who know a lot about the lore have, and that's a lot to ask. I really don't like the way power is listed. They're listed like unrestrictedly in the 5th edition books. I'm still of the strong conviction that even though Hecata and Lesombre share Oblivion as a discipline, they should not have access to one another's powers unless specifically permitted by the GM on like or the storyteller, as we say here. I always use GM on a case-by-case basis, because the Hecata use the discipline for necromancy and the Lesombre use it for shadow magic, and those are two very different things. They should at least be clearly labeled. As for bloodline powers, they often represent extremely obscure and specific disciplines that this exclusion principle doubly applies for. The way 5th edition tries to gate some of the powers to certain clans is by making them amalgam powers. So while the power Dementation, for instance, belongs to the Dominate discipline, you also need dots in Obfuscate to actually learn it. Dementation is an identity-giving power for the Malkavians. It used to be the in-clan discipline they had instead of Dominate as a default, but it's still gated behind the fact that only the Malkavians have both Dominate and Obfuscate as in-clan disciplines, which, for instance, the Ventru or Lesombre, who also have Dominate as an in-clan disciplines, don't. They don't have Obfuscate. And if the Ventru put in the extra work to learn Dementation, I think that's fine. You know, that was always possible. It might be interesting, it's the exact type of exception we are here for, but I do hold that the special powers of the great clans should be a little more ubiquitous than the special powers of like small and unique bloodlines. So I decided to gate all of these behind a low-cost investment. This also gives me the opportunity to make some discipline powers that are not amalgam powers, but just powers of that particular discipline. Because I think shoehorning in a secondary discipline doesn't always make sense. Luckily, they also introduced a cool new thing in 5th edition, lore sheets. I actually really like those. And I actually think it's entirely fair to lock the option to learn those powers behind the low price of a 2-dot lore sheet background. Especially if that lore sheet has no prerequisites, as some of them do. Most of them don't have any prerequisites, the ones that I made. Like, if you want to be a descendant of Zelios, you have to be a Nosferatu, right? Because Zelios was a Nosferatu. Anyone can, in theory, purchase the Mnemosyne lore sheet, and there are members of the group that are not Malkavians, like Cuthbert Beckett, although, you know, whether or not he's a member is questionable, it's complicated. It's just that Malkavians will have an easier time getting those powers thanks to the nature of their blood. So buying that specific background obviously makes more sense for them. As with every lore sheet, this one has 5 items on it, rated 1 to 5 dots in terms of purchasing costs, and you don't need to purchase them consecutively. They are all their own thing. Number 1 is called Trusted Associate, which means that you know someone who is a member of the sect, even if you don't know about the sect as such, and that person knows a lot of secret K-Knight lore. Number 2 is called Inductee, which means you're considered a member of the group and may learn its powers, provided you can find someone to teach them to you. Number 3 is called Secret Library, giving you a cache of secret and probably pretty illegal knowledge that others may covet. Let me correct that, others definitely covet. Number 4 is called In Memoriam, which means you have partaken in one of those group diableries, and it has given you free skill specialties. If you use those specialties though, the stain of diablerie will become visible in your aura. And number 5 is called Agent of Aristotle, and it gives you a personal relationship with Aristotle de Laurent himself, who sees you as his agent. And no, that doesn't necessitate you being a formal member of the sect. There isn't such a thing as like official membership, it's more like it's somewhat informal, but also not super informal. But what about the powers? What about these crazy powers? I've been teasing them, and I won't leave you hanging. Common Knowledge is an Auspex 1 Dominate 2 power that gives you a temporary dot in a skill that whatever mortal you were feeding on excelled at, working much like a Dyscrasia. Sense Thoughts is an Auspex 2 power that allows you to sense the surface thoughts of everyone around you, which are often jumbled and idiosyncratic and can easily become overwhelming. Impart Memory is a Dominate 2 Auspex 1 power that allows you to give someone else a memory that you have, which isn't mind control because they'll know this isn't one of their own memories. Memory Crypt is an Obfuscate 4 power that I worked on pretty hard not to make game breaking, and it basically allows you to remember secrets without remembering them, so like they're safe, they can't be gotten out of you, but almost more crucially, it allows you to put skills as like experience points that you have into storage and replace them with different ones. That may sound strong to you, but it becomes even more insane when paired with Diablerize Kine, a Dominate 5 power that allows you to diablerize mortals and gain some of their knowledge and ability. It's kind of like, Diablery Light, but you still get stains. So ultimately, I think even the combination of the two is balanced. It's also their very high tier disciplines. Those, not that Vampire is ever particularly about balancing, but high tier disciplines particularly are not. And finally, Façon le Visage, an Obfuscate 5 Dominate 3 power that literally allows you to turn a person into someone else, to the extent that they themselves don't remember that they were ever anyone but the person they are now. Except for supernatural attributes. So if you want to clone the Princess Ghoul, but you have, you want it to be bloodbound to you instead, it's kind of a long con power that allows you to do exactly that. Moving on to the next bloodline, the Draugr. Favorite of mine both in Skyrim and abroad. I do love me a cold one when it comes to vampires. I know something called a Draugr exists within the lore of werewolf. I'm pretty sure Vampire the Requiem has something called a Draugr, but I was shocked to be unable to find anything like them in Vampire the Masquerade, so I decided to take a crack at it. In the polar cycles of the not-so-distant past, the lords, princes, and fiefs of Scandinavia would travel to remote and frigid areas accompanied by a retinue of their most valued warrior ghouls, carrying a multitude of treasures to seek audiences with the individuals known only as the Frost-Shrouded. A few weeks later, they'd return with their ghouls now walking corpses, bloated and rotten, frost-burned and sinewy. Only the wealthiest of kindred could afford Draugr, as the prices demanded by the Frost-Shrouded were steep, and they generally refused to embrace groups smaller than 5 in number. A ruler who commanded Draugr was feared far and wide, as they were not just deadly as a squad, but highly accomplished and versatile fighters when operating as individuals. Their greatest boon was their resistance to the rays of the sun, which made them ideal protectors from opportunistic attacks on the barrows into which the Blood Jarls and their households retreated during the short nights of summer. By ancient lore, the only clan that the Frost-Shrouded would do business with were the Ventru, which didn't stop wealthy and powerful kindred from other clans from seeking them out in their remote and hidden lairs, the locations of which the Ventru clan did everything in their power to keep secret. Draugr were not permitted to embrace, and this was made very clear both to them and their Ventru masters. Most actually couldn't, but in the instances where it did happen, the Frost-Shrouded, in spite of their secluded unlives, would always learn of it somehow, and send their agents to destroy the Draugr in question, as well as their offspring. The lord in whose service the Draugr had been was never permitted to purchase new Draugr again, a ban which often extended to all of their descendants, sometimes even their sires. Some tried to seek out other Frost-Shrouded, often taking on even harder and lengthier journeys, but were always unceremoniously rejected. Following accounts of their clients, the Frost-Shrouded had mastery over some sort of blood magic. Ventru blood jarls would describe countless strange and unsettling rituals, part of which they suspected were for show, as the Ventru might, while others, clearly, even they had to admit, must have had some sort of purpose. The Frost-Shrouded would administer a purifying concoction to their would-be embraces in order to avoid any risk of being affected by the blood bond these ghouls had with their masters. Most of their blood was collected in large stone bowls instead of being drunk outright, where they would turn it gelid, preserving it for later consumption. Many of the gifts given to the Frost-Shrouded to enlist their services were rare and expensive alchemical reagents that made this sort of magic possible. The original Draugr created by the Frost-Shrouded were consistently of the 8th generation, suggesting that the Frost-Shrouded themselves were a disparate cabal that were all of the 7th generation, which may mean that they all had a single common sire. It isn't difficult to guess that they were most likely descended from Cappadocians, though their blood is heavily mutated. In modern nights, Draugr are rare for a multitude of reasons. Their corpse-like appearance makes it hard for them to maintain the Masquerade, and pickings in the cold regions of the Arctic Circle are slim. Draugr of higher generations are no longer hunted by the Frost-Shrouded. The Ventru have not heard from their former associates in a very long time, and though few modern princes sleep in barrows during the summer anymore, the special relationship between the clan of kings and the Draugr persists, and some of the older ones keep them as prized bodyguards. Draugr have also not been confined to Scandinavia for a long time. There is at least one residing in Inverness, and the scourge serving the Ventru Prince of Vancouver is described by those who have seen it as a blackened corpse that transforms into dead animals. It's even possible that some manage to attend the family reunion and become part of Clan Hecata. So yeah, as you can tell, very Nordic, very icy, very Dark Nights, very Skyrim. I like Skyrim. I'm a Skyrim enthusiast. I love that game. They have access to the disciplines Fortitude, Potence, and Protean, and this is actually based on the research I did for historical, or rather folkloric accounts of Draugr as recounted by people in Scandinavia. In these tales, they tend to be exactly rotten corpses, which is, of course, the medieval clan that represents that were the Cappadocians, so immediately that was a good point of reference in making them appear corpse-like. They're always very strong in those tales. It's one of their defining characteristics, which makes me think of Potence, obviously. And there are also many accounts of them transforming into dead and rotting animals, so Protean was an obvious choice as well. There are a few other aspects in the lore that I could have focused on for the third discipline, but I decided on Fortitude because it's a Cappadocian in clan discipline, and it would fit well thematically with their whole warrior thing, which obviously they are predestined to be killing machines with these disciplines. And now consider that most of the people embraced into this bloodline were already accomplished warriors. Their clan bane is called Corpse Aspect and is mechanically similar to the Nosferatu bane, since there is no real equivalent to like the Cappadocian bane in 5th edition, so it provided an excellent basis to work off. But they also have their own compulsion, which is actually a new mechanic I love, and which allows me so much space to infuse them with character. It's called frigidity, and it's a sort of survival instinct that drives them to seek out freezing or at least very cold places. In most of the world, that would be walk-in freezers. As for their resistance to sunlight, I only gave them a single power called Ice Blood, a Fortitude 2 power that allows them to sort of freeze their vitae and take sunlight and fire damage as superficial instead of aggravated, and it delays when they have to make their Terror Frenzy test. The downside is that because their blood is frozen, if they make any rouse checks for like any reason, the effect ends immediately. And that's it. No elaborate loadout of like amalgam powers, just the basics. They're not particularly complex, but sometimes a little spice is all you need to make things interesting. Or in this case, I suppose a little ice. Am I fucking right? Next up is the one that actually started me doing this little project, the Leshy. I don't even remember how I got this idea. I'm pretty sure I was looking at like David Paulides' Wikipedia page. But I developed this sort of tree vampire months ago, and it has not let me go since. I say months ago, it might have been years ago. Dwellers of dark forests, Leshy use their vitae to create ghouls of the complex and wide-reaching web of plants and fungi that makes up the basis of life there, corrupting and enslaving it as the kindred of the city do human society through their webs of agents and favors. Few kindred would recognize the Leshy for one of their own if they met it. Not that this would be likely to happen, as even to the gangrel, among whose brood this bloodline most likely numbers, they are hermits of the most reclusive variety. Most of those kindred who know of them at all think of the Leshy as rare, but considering how widespread they are, they may actually be quite common in absolute numbers. Around the world, they are also known as Draith, Pomberos, Curupira, Wildmen, Taipo, Druden, Vrikokalas, and various other names that probably more accurately apply to beings that may not be vampires at all. Leshy do not care about what others call them, so long as they're left to their woodlands, without the interference of princes, bishops, and barons. Many are probably as ignorant of kindred society as that society is of them. Perhaps one or two have claimed a large park in a city somewhere, but they are very much the exception. If scholars were aware of them, debates about whether Leshy are parasites or symbiotic with the forests they claim dominion over would be endless. They certainly extract life force from their surroundings and taint places with the darkness of death by feeding on animals and humans lured into the underbrush. But they also tend to and feed their forest, fertilizing it with the remains of the dead and strengthening it with their vitae. When civilization encroaches, they often fight to beat it back using human tactics, though some would argue that the dark and sinister aura of a forest inhabited by a Leshy will only motivate the humans living near it to tear it down with greater urgency. So in terms of disciplines, the Leshy have animalism, fortitude, and protean, which we will note are the same disciplines as the gangrel, which they are clearly descended from. The similarities continue in their clan bane, the dreadful woes, which functions much like the gangrel clan bane, except instead of retaining animal features from frenzy, they retain like plant and fungus features. Their compulsion is a little different, it's called reaping, and it represents their need to overharvest and waste resources every once in a while, which I thought much more thematically appropriate for them being vampires, as opposed to something like, a protective instinct over the forest. That's not what vampires are like, really. Now, when it comes to disciplines and their associated powers, you might be asking yourself, how are they going to control plants with those disciplines? And the answer is, I just created a couple more powers, primarily related to animalism, that allows animalism to pertain to plants instead of animals. Again, if this were 20th edition, I would have replaced animalism with a discipline called wilding or something like that, but it isn't. And though this is not perfectly elegant, it's also not a complete and unreasonable stretch to make animalism extend to that sort of realm of nature. It isn't even unprecedented within 5th edition for vampires to be able to control plants. There are blood sorcery rituals related to controlling plants, but of course there are blood sorcery rituals related to pretty much everything in this game. The new powers are, first off, Sow the Red Seed, an Animalism 1 power that effectively allows you to make ghoul trees. These ghoul trees become a dark nexus for the forest around them, and they form the power basis for Leshies, who, similar to the Tzimisce, are not exactly the most itinerant of kindred. Nerves of the Soil is a Protean 1 Animalism 1 power that allows them to gain large sensory scale impressions picked up by plants, primarily smells, emotions, temperature, and vibrations. This way they can get an overview of their domain, and the denser the vegetation is, the higher the sort of resolution of the information is also. With Vile Botany and Animalism 2 power, they can manipulate plants to do their bidding. Classic like vines grasping an enemy and holding them in place, or fungi releasing their spores type of stuff. The Withering Harvest, an Animalism 4 Fortitude 2 power, allows you to draw actual life force and nourishment from the forest through your ghoul tree, with great cost to that forest, so it's not a power that can be used particularly frequently, as it leaves that forest barren and full of desiccated animal corpses. Cortico's Dermis is an RPG classic Fortitude 4 Protean 2 power, which is essentially its bark skin, right? It gives the user a whole layer of tree bark armor that needs to be destroyed first before you can get at them, and also conveniently protects them from getting staked. Ratatosker's Run is a Protean 4 Animalism 1 power that essentially allows for teleportation through plants, allowing Leshy to cross significant distances in their domain. And finally, the Wild Hunt, an Animalism 5 power that goes somewhat back to the roots of animalism by incorporating animals into that again as well. Essentially, you sick the whole forest on a particular person, and the forest will fuck that person up. Ideally, the person in question is already in the forest when you sick the forest on them, but you could also bring them there after the fact, or you know they're gonna be in that forest soon, and that's when you activate the power. Unlike the special powers for the Mnemosyne, these are not actually locked behind a lore sheet. Leshy don't really have much of a society, and the lore pertaining to them is too idiosyncratic to make one. It's always some sort of local story about a local guy. Some country gangrel might know some of their powers, especially like the Wild Hunt power, but beyond that I suppose you will have to exercise restraint. Many of these powers build upon one another anyway, being built around ghoul trees and all, so people who take them will be invested anyway. Speaking of being invested in a ghoul tree, I could be your ghoul tree if you invested in me on patreon.com. I'd actually appreciate that sort of support from like you or everyone, but especially you, particular viewer, who is viewing this video right now and whom I am addressing directly. If you can afford it, don't bankrupt yourself on my account, but if you have a few bucks or just $1 to spare at the end of the month, consider supporting me there. It helps out a lot for me to do this weird sort of stuff that I do. If you can't support me financially but still want to help, share this video with a friend you think might be interested in it. Next up, we have one that really stretches the definition of a bloodline because it is explicitly not about any single clan, nor is it something that is set in stone at the time of your embrace. In fact, you might call it a sort of second embrace. Kindred are beings of death and destruction. They feed upon the living to sustain their own life, end existence with ease just to stay past their allotted hour. But in this we find another quality of their existence. They are beings of stasis. Over centuries and millennia they are unchanging, reverting each day to a singular form, holding on to values and ideas that have long since changed in the daylight world in order to maintain within themselves the ideal of a person that should have long decayed into oblivion. The very structure of their society is archaic, designed entirely around maintaining a status quo no living being adheres to anymore. Ancient and brilliant minds are dedicated to limiting change in all its forms. Metaphysically speaking, most kindred are creatures of the Weaver, and many lupines would agree that they bear the spider's stench. The Weaver knows this too, and every once in a while its servants, the pattern spiders, will observe a kindred to ascertain whether they can be solidified into a true agent of stasis. If they are found worthy, the pattern spiders weave a cocoon of primal energy around them during their day sleep, hordes of tiny crawlers entering their insides to solidify those with the weave of reality as well. The hardening does not take long. After just a few days, they emerge anew, changed forever by the experience, empowered with blessings of the Weaver and burdened with a need for metaphysical conservatism almost as strong as their thirst. Coming back from their brief absences, they take their place in kindred society again. The changes in their personality may be subtle. They were, after all, predisposed to stasis, but they may now embody tradition with particular zeal. And where otherwise they may have been dethroned by agents of change or disruption, their new powers can make all the difference in that struggle to prevail. How many kindred are direct agents of the Weaver is unclear, and most of them probably don't even understand the extent of their own significance. But they are here, hiding in plain sight, functioning as intended in the established order. A number of years ago, I came up with the idea of a spider vampire, by which I mean it's, definitely something someone had come up with before, but the idea also occurred to me independently of that, and I have been obsessed with it ever since. Now, the Aranae are not simply spider vampires, right? They are agents of the Weaver, representing order, cohesion, authority, the status quo. Undergoing Weaverification does not actually change your clan in any meaningful way, it just adds a new compulsion to your repertoire called preservation, which is sort of the opposite of the Brujah compulsion and not quite the same as the Ventru compulsion, because it is about preserving the status quo of, something that is, preventing someone from changing something. They come with a lore sheet, and if you purchase any of the merits on it, the implication is that you have undergone this process of being transformed, or rather solidified, by pattern spiders. Number one is the reinforced bond, which makes the blood bond you create stronger. It reinforces your hierarchies. Number two is Gifts of the Weaver, which gives you access to the Weaver discipline powers. Now, because it doesn't change your clan, what I did is I created one discipline power for each of the 10 disciplines, which the vampire can learn intuitively as they would any other discipline power. The intuitive learning is to sort of offset the fact that you only get 3 powers as opposed to like numerous ones. and also those powers are kinda strong. Number 3 is Forfend the Beast, which allows you to just stop yourself from destroying something important while in frenzy or because you rolled poorly. Number 4 is Not a Pet exactly, and it essentially gives you a pattern spider companion that exists on the other side of the gauntlet, but with which you can communicate and which sees you as a sort of equal partner. And number 5 is Revelation of the Raja, which is a special task you received from the capital W Weaver personally, and which you believe in so religiously that you get free willpower rerolls toward fulfilling it. But what are these powers? What can I do with them? Give me the powers. Many of these are actually related to not making things happen, to avoid situations, because situations have a tendency of upending the status quo, and that is precisely what the Weaver is trying to avoid. So as you can imagine, it was kind of difficult to come up with some of these. Like for instance, Chaos is an Animalism 2 power that prevents animals from entering a place, with the possibility of creating sort of whitelists for particular species or individuals. It even works against ghouled creatures, though not perfectly. As with many things, there is a blood sorcery ritual that does something similar, but not quite this. Palæsthesia is an Auspex 1 power that allows you to sense the pattern web. In practice, this is most useful for investigations, as you can sense whether things are out of place, what things are connected to each other in terms of like ideas, what established habits shape a location, what is missing here. If you play Disco Elysium, it's kind of like a mix of Inland Empire and Visual Calculus. It sense the unseen without the magic, but with more of the mundane. Obviate is a blood sorcery 2 power that allows you to stop other vampires' disciplines from working. The thing about this one is that blood sorcery is a discipline, it's sort of a manifestation of dynamism, of the wild. It's extremely versatile, unpredictable, literal magic that embodies change. So if the Weaver were to have some level of control over it, the Weaver would choose to use it to stop magic from happening. Pluck the String is a Celerity 5 power that essentially allows you to undo something that's just happened by just allowing you to re-roll the dice pool you just failed. The idea being that in the process of weaving reality together, there's like a tiny delay where the string is sort of still vibrating before it's set, and if you're fast enough, you can extend this vibration by just flicking it and make the outcome different because it's not set in string yet. V20 had celerity-related powers that were basically time travel, so don't get on my ass for this. Status Quo is a Dominate 2 power that allows you to force people to do their job, whatever that job may be. It doesn't allow you to give orders, just sort of reiterate them. And it's cheaper than the other powers of that tier, as well as much less limited. You don't need eye contact, and you can also apply it to several people at once. This may seem like a sort of weak power, but if you employ it strategically, especially on people that you do have some real authority over socially, and, with some thought, it's actually extremely mighty. Iron Core is a Fortitude 4 power that prevents you from taking aggravated damage. Notably, it does not protect you from taking superficial damage. It's specifically aggravated damage you cannot suffer, because your pattern is hardened. So not even fire and sunlight can damage you, but bullets can as usual. Just not so much that it would become aggravated damage. I like this one because it's super thematic with relation to the sort of metaphysical spirit shenanigans that the Weaver represents. It constricts only the core of the essence of the thing. Luxum Arcanum is an Obfuscate 3 power that allows you to align the strings of fate in such a way that you can hide a secret. By sheer coincidence, no one will find it. Even someone dedicated to looking into that thing will have an extremely difficult time doing so. Recall the Echo is an Oblivion 2 power that allows you to restore destroyed things for a time, though afterwards they fall apart completely. Much like blood sorcery is used to block an aspect of dynamism, Oblivion, which is the worm and entropy aligned discipline, functions to undo some of the effects of that, which with, the worm actually being specifically trapped by the Weaver, that's what the Weaver has done. So for this to allow you to pull something from the underworld, essentially, I'm kind of proud of that idea. Grip the Blood is a Potence 2 power that essentially gives you paralytic spider venom. And look, listen, I know there is a power called Scorpion's Touch, that is about venom, it's the Ministry Banu Hakim do it. but that affects the Vitae, and it does damage. It's a different thing. This doesn't do damage, and it is an independent venom. I actually struggled for a long time to come up with a potence power, because potence and strength are inherently about breaking and moving shit. And I thought a power that lets you close a jar of pickles very tightly would be like a bit useless. That was another option I was brainstorming, but which, eventually got supplanted. The venom is potent, and it makes you stop moving. What else do you want? Fit is a Presence 1 power that is kind of an inversion of Awe and Daunt, and that it makes you fit in. People see you, they remember you, but unless they have a good reason to think otherwise, they assume you're supposed to be where you are, doing the things you're doing. Even in really crazy situations, people's first instincts will be to think, it's odd that this person is allowed to be here and do that. Though that might require quite the bit of smoothing over. And finally, Spinneret is a Protean 2 power, which, yes, is the thing you have all been hoping for. It's the ability to manifest silk glands to weave spider silk. Or rather something a little stronger than spider silk, which also, burns up in the sunlight. And look, the power's official description says it comes out of your wrists, like with Spider-Man, because I am personally not weird, but that's just me. If you are weird, there's really no reason why it shouldn't come out of your ass. Just because that's what the rules say doesn't mean you gotta follow that like a normal person would. You can also have spider silk coming out your ass. If you really need that in your life, that's fine. As a little side note, not all of these require some sort of dice pool, but all of those that do focus on the composure attribute because it fits thematically. But also because I recently built a character for a game in 1880s New Orleans that my boyfriend is going to be running very soon. Campaign, Chronicle, and his highest attribute is composure because it fits the character, who, just to preempt any questions, is the Malkavian Primogen and the single largest player in the New Orleans tobacco trade, which at that time was a significant luxury commodity traded there. Not that I intend to have the guy transformed by the Weaver, he's got enough of a stick up his ass already. He was, after all, born a member of the Spanish colonialist aristocracy. Next up, we have one of the more, contentious for many of the vampire purist or new players, the Phreaks. They're not controversial because the name, it derives from phreaking, which was the predecessor to hacking, back when it was less about microchips and code and more about telephone lines and TV stations. Most of the kindred bloodlines that walk the earth are shrouded in mystery, and to the elders, this one is the most inscrutable. But the Phreaks know exactly when and where they first saw the dark of the world. The 7th of August, 1973, in a warehouse on the corner of Green Street and Battery Street in San Francisco. On this night, a group of anarchs led by the Nosferatu electrical engineer Studhorse and the Tremere technomancer Margita Frankie de Piedmont turned the thin blood volunteer Galen Tannehill into the very first Phreak. They were an elite group of forward-thinking kindred fascinated with technology. Many would call them the first digital Draculas, though that wouldn't be entirely accurate, as they were merely one of the many cells that was becoming this particular subculture of kindred society. They weren't even all kindred either. Mortal will workers, spirits of the dead, and some say even lupines were involved with the project as well. Though the official story is that these were a rogue group operating far outside the authority of the elders, it is not difficult to learn that the concoction which, alongside a powerful electrical charge while hooked up to the telephone network, brought about the transformation, contained fresh vitae from the Nosferatu Methuselah Trajan. Their goal was to create a bloodline that could natively interface with the technological marvels of the emerging information age. Through their extremely complex and costly ritual, Galen Tannehill's blood was supercharged, and she became a kindred of the 9th generation, apparently without diablerie, fundamentally attuned to the tickles and vibrations of electricity. Though all architects of that original ritual are referred to as Phreaks, some have taken to calling them Galvanists, only those Galen embraced are of the Phreak bloodline. A small and elusive group found exclusively among the Anarchs, there's nonetheless more of them than you would expect, given they've barely been around for 50 years. They are still exploring and developing their abilities, though it's become clear that other kindred can learn their powers, strange though they are. Lightning is part of the blood now. Look, when I first discovered Vampire the Masquerade for myself, I didn't like the idea of vampires that could control technology because I had heard somewhere that there were mages out there who could do that sort of thing, who were basically like hackers and mad steampunk scientists. Not understanding the cosmology of World of Darkness at the time or the concept of consensus, it just thematically didn't sit very well with me. I have since grown and changed as a person, but I'm often still hesitant introducing technological elements to Vampire because it's a game about ancient plots, people, and power structures. As much as the 90s and early 2000s cool vampire media might have influenced me otherwise, it just didn't feel right. So I understand why you might be hesitant to include stuff like this. So, this is a point where I once again remind you that none of what you see here needs to be in your World of Darkness. It is your World of Darkness. I love the Phreaks though, and I love the information world. I'm a big fan of ShrekNet and the digital Draculas, the conflict that these things create with the Camarilla, and to a large extent every other society of supernatural beings, because the information age is truly upon us, and there is no stopping it. And at this point there's also a lot of quaint old technology that does sort of have an air of perhaps not the primordial necessarily, but certainly something old about it. The Phreaks have a lore sheet that consists of the following items. Number 1 is Glorified Janitor, where basically Galen Tannehill herself has a haven somewhere in your domain. Being a hardline anarch, she doesn't really recognize you as her ruler, but also being a hardcore pragmatist, she understands it's probably good to know you. Number 2 is Sharing is Caring, which, as you might have inferred from the pattern of what I've been doing here, allows you to purchase the Phreak powers. Number 3 is Data Hoarder, which means that you are in possession of backups of certain portions of ShrekNet, which is pretty illegal according to the Camarilla. Number 4 is Call the Collective, which has you be in touch with a bunch of very competent but perhaps somewhat flaky and not entirely trustworthy mortal hackers, and also not so mortal ones. And finally, number 5, the Great Galvanists, of which you are one with this background. You were there that night. You were involved with the project. You know a bunch of people from it, many of them powerful, and many of them not even kindred. The Phreaks' in-clan disciplines are Auspex, Celerity, and Dominate. And though it's not possible to simply say that they descend from one clan or another, the bulk of the power in their creation did come from Nosferatu Vitae. This is reflected in their clan Bane, Lichtenberg's Warpaint, which once again functions similar to the Nosferatu clan Bane, but they look like people killed by lightning strikes. They have these sort of lightning-shaped scars all over their body, which are called Lichtenberg patterns, bear scars and melting scars akin to those of burn victims, manifested differently from individual to individual, of course, because that's how these things work. And also everywhere they go, it smells faintly of ozone, which is not a disgusting smell at all. It's, if you don't know what that is, it's like when you go outside you can smell a thunderstorm coming. But it is an odd smell to encounter in many places. They also have a compulsion, impatience, and it's exactly what it says on the tin. They're iPad kids. They're animated with electrical power. Their dopamine is fried by algorithms, so they want to get to the point. They want to get to the action. They do the thing right now. Stop fucking sitting around, deliberating forever, just go! Which also fits very well with their whole, anarch thing. The powers they have developed over the years are White Noise and Auspex 1 Technology Sense. It allows the user to sense data streams and electrical currents, know when they're being recorded and seek out the recording device, stuff like that. Specifically most useful, they can know the contents of physical storage media, not necessarily in detail, but they know what pirated movies are on this unlabeled USB stick they found without needing to insert that shit into their computer. Enter the Matrix is an Auspex 4 Celerity 2 power that takes that shit to the next level by allowing you to enter the realm of data, cyberspace, usually the purview of almost exclusively mages, by uploading either their mind or just their entire body. And they can use that to interact with technological devices more directly, explore the datasphere, and even sort of teleport. Big fucking Zap is a Celerity 4 power that is also exactly what it says on the tin. It delivers a powerful electric shock. That's it. And now we get into the real interesting powers, because, Into the Matrix wasn't interesting at all. The reason these guys have, dominated as a discipline. Left click is a dominate 1 power that allows the user to make a technological device perform a function it is primed to do, even if there are minor obstructions. This really clicked for me with that scene in What We Do in the Shadows in the episode about Jackie Day Turner. The character that they had never talked about before, they didn't talk about him after, but it was a whole episode that was just about him, and, afterwards he was, never seen again. He has trouble operating the jukebox at his bar and does a little ding magic action, and it starts playing Robert Palmer. That's what this power is, basically. Right click, on the other hand, is the Dominate 2 power that goes a little more in depth, because it allows you to activate a specific function of the device instead of just the one it is currently set up for. And then you have Rewrite Code, a Dominate 3 power that will make technological devices do things they could not ordinarily do. These must still be things the device is at least thematically designed to do. Sticking with our jukebox example, you could make the jukebox basically play a song that isn't programmed into the jukebox, and it could do it at a volume that it shouldn't be capable of, but you can't use the jukebox as a spaceship. With this, we have a whole different Dominate power pipeline, the third one by my count. The first 3 tiers of that discipline, if you choose to stick with one theme, have increasingly more powerful powers for the mind control and memory alteration pipelines. This is now the technology one. As far as I'm aware, none of these powers are thus far in V5 as a part of blood magic, but in V20 you did have the thaumaturgical paths of technomancy and the path of the Levenbold, which filled a similar thematic niche. And finally, the last and weirdest one, though honestly these last 2 are in similar universe of weirdness, and I placed this one last because one of them had to be last. Them of the Vaults, all words capitalized against the Chicago Manual of Style conventions to emphasize the monumentality of their existence. There are legends among the fair folk of a once powerful noble called the Count of Marrow, a feared and most dreadful individual who resided deeper within the dreaming than most, in a sinister fortress made of black stone, built atop the ruins of a palace once occupied by a similarly powerful and only slightly more horrible Fomorian chieftain. Many things are said about the Count, that he created the first redcaps by sowing his kindest qualities as mushroom spores, that he had drunk the heartblood of Fomorian beasts, even that he created banality in order to terrify his fellow Fae. Many of these tales are contested, but a common thread in all stories about the Count of Marrow is that he was a master at traversing the dreaming, and though he never took it upon himself, an early scholar of the changeling way. Many of his servants were such, transformed at his own behest. As they were in many ways his own spawn, he enjoyed relations with the vampires, and devised a plan ahead of the shattering wherein he would have many of his changeling servants turned into kindred, so he could take them with him to defeat all other armies of Arcadia and rule supreme once the other lords and ladies, weakened and bickering, fled there. But when he showed up at the gates with his undead changeling army, the walls were already up. Arcadia would not let him in. His ambitions of besieging the exalted realm also failed, as more and more of the creatures went mad with a lack of blood, so he sealed them in the ancient Fomorian vaults underneath his castle, where he left them to escape to Arcadia against the oncoming tide of banality. But time was not kind to those vaults, and after a few centuries, though what does that truly mean in a place like that, some of them escaped and began to prowl the dark recesses of the dreaming, caught in the throes of madness, but kept material by the power of the blood. With the resurgence, and especially the evanescence, more and more of them have found their way back into the mundane world as the old trods reopen. Most are mad, far beyond the grasp of reason, and warriors of the changelings and kindred alike hunt them down, or at least attempt to. Some, however, followed their ancient instincts and embraced a new brood of kindred with mutated blood and horrid sires. Among those, some might find refuge among the caitiff and Magar, but they are all rather young and possess coveted gifts in their blood. It is only a matter of time before the wrong type of powerful people learn of their existence and attempt to exploit it for their own ends. Bloodlines. So yeah, them of the Vaults are a bastard fairy bloodline, which, especially in the Dark Ages, used to happen quite a bit. A while ago I did a video about various bloodlines, and I talked about the Chiassids, effectively a fairy bloodline of Clan La Sombra that is tainted with the energies of the realm of the dead. What they did is they claimed the term Chiassid, which used to mean like a changeling that became a vampire, by just exterminating all the other changeling vampires, except for the ones who ended up calling themselves Magar, which, you know, then came to mean the thing that previously Chiassid meant. I personally am still fascinated with changeling vampires because they're so full of insane potential. I also just love changelings. And I'm kind of sad that the only real bloodline to this effect is underworld themed. We already had clans for that. One of them was the clan that it's a bloodline of? Not to knock Chiassids, I think they're hella cool. Them of the Vault's Bane is their inhuman Mayen, which does not work like the Nosferatu Bane for a change, but gives them an alien aura that makes it impossible for them to pretend to be fully human. It blocks their access to the blush of life. Their compulsion is to terrify. They are, after all, nightmare creatures, and they really get off on scaring people. They need to do it. Them of the Vaults have the in-clan disciplines Blood, Sorcery, Fortitude, and Presence. Though, especially for Fortitude and Presence, I actually encourage people to substitute other in-clan disciplines, as changelings and their blood are variable by nature, and the Count of Marrow sealed away a variety of changeling vampires in his vaults. It was a variety of kiths and a variety of, like, clans. They don't have any special discipline powers, but they do come with a variety of blood sorcery rituals, which, yes, can also be learned by other blood sorcerers, if they can get their hands on them. Many of these rituals are adapted from the dark abilities available to the Fae of the Unseelie and Shadow Courts, and the aesthetic they are meant to invoke is very much not hermetic, but like oddly practical and metaphorical. You know, fairy magic. Locate Trot is a level 1 ritual with which they can locate an entry to a fairy trot, a path through the dreaming, in the mortal world. They also learn how to open it, though it doesn't make it any easier for them to do so. If the trot opens only on the 13th of every odd calendar month, you know it, but you can't do anything about it. Oneirocritica is a level 1 ritual that allows the user to experience the target's current dream, which they can then interpret to gain information about the target. Discover Dread is also a level 1 ritual that allows you to find out what the target fears, which, especially given them of the Vault's clan compulsion, can come in super handy. It's more specific than the other one and also more reliable. Going into the level 2's Send Dreams straightforwardly allows you to send the target a dream, though not something fully choreographed. Strong impulses, like specific impulses that you send them, which is in many ways even better because the target's imagination will fill in the blanks in line with your intent. Wakeful Unreality is a level 2 ritual that makes the target hallucinate things from their dream life in the real world, which can be immensely stressful. Hag-Ridden Rest is a level 2 ritual that messes up the target's sleep, ensuring they cannot regenerate willpower during their rest cycle. Reveal True Name is also a level 2 ritual which, you know, it reveals a person's true name. It's that simple. We do nowadays walk around just going by our true names for the most part. But that's just an approximation of your true name, which includes the specific way you think of it and the feelings you associate with it, which are not easily heard by others. Knowing someone's true name makes it significantly easier to cast spells against them. House of Mirrors is a level 3 ritual, a classic, like, fairy battle strategy that summons a number of incorporeal but confusing copies of yourself. Real tricksy shit. Steel Dagda's Boon is another level 3 ritual that protects you while traveling on a trod, as vampires are banned from many fairy trods, and quite unpopular with the Guardians of the Dreaming in general. Draw Back the Curtain moves us into level 4. It's a sort of juiced up version of Waking Unreality, which attunes the target to the realities of the dreaming and makes it possible for them to be affected by them. In fairness though, most of the time them of the Vaults cast this on themselves in order to fully experience the chimerical duality of the world. And now, straight to level 5, Drink the Fire is one that might be a little controversial because it allows you to absorb energy from a balefire that's the animating force of a fairy freehold, which is sort of a fairy house, and subsume it as though it were vitae. Really what happens is that the user puts some of their own vitae into an iron pot, then brings it to a simmer over the balefire, which through the sinister magic of iron infuses it with the glamour of that balefire. So you drink it back up. The owners of that balefire will of course hate that shit, especially given that an unfortunate roll can extinguish the balefire altogether. And finally, Dream Interloper. Another level 5 ritual which straightforwardly allows the user to invade someone else's dream. Except they have the advantage of being entirely lucid, while an equal partner in manipulating the goings-on of the dream. Them of the Vaults also have a lore sheet, and unlike the other ones presented in this video, it does actually require you to be of the bloodline. The first item on the lore sheet is Freehold Privileges, which means that for some odd reason, you have access to a changeling freehold that you can use as a haven. It's not exactly your haven, though, you'll have to share it with a bunch of changelings, and quite frankly, they probably don't like you very much and only tolerate your presence because of some law or edict. Even if they do like you, if something suspicious ever happens in there, you will be the first under suspicion. And if you break the rules, they will do a lot worse than just kick you out. Number 2 is Intuitive Sorcery, which allows you to substitute either wits or stamina as the stat you use instead of intelligence to perform blood sorcery rituals, reflecting the impulsive and non-procedural way in which changelings utilize magic. Number 3 is Magar's Memory, and it extends upon the idea that I raised earlier where, you should feel free to replace some of the in-clan disciplines by giving you a 4th in-clan discipline of your choice. Number 4 is Unseelie Patron, which puts you into the service of a powerful Unseelie Fey Noble that will put you to work just, doing stuff for them, but which will also support and protect you as is required of a noble patron. And finally, number 5 is Visions of the Vaults, which primarily saddles you with disturbing visions, but which once per story also allows you to unleash an unspeakable horror straight from your memory of the dreaming into the world. It's probably a good thing that venality will grind it to dust in short order, but it will be a dramatic fucking moment for sure. I did actually struggle with making them of the Vaults into player options as well, as I envisioned them primarily as interesting villains, but frankly, all of the Bloodlines I've created here could have been super interesting villains. That's kind of a World of Darkness thing, so I figured, why the hell not? Vampire is a game of villains. But I'm afraid that is it for me today. Thank you very much for watching this video. Like, comment, subscribe, share this to your relevant communities. Consider supporting me on Patreon, buying some of my merchandise, or my short story collection that's back there. I could very much use your support. And in that spirit, folks, it's been a month for me. Many things happened. I had a breakup, my grandma came out as homophobic, my long COVID problems acted up a little bit, various things, so I'm looking forward to the good times now. Speaking of the long COVID, and see you around, cunts.